In this video, I'll go through why I think the idea of pensions has broken down so significantly, why you probably, if you're under the age of 40, 45, cannot expect to retire in any meaningful way, and then also what the current obsession with retirement even is. Why is it that we have a society that has this grip made by the aged, the idea of being old and enjoying your leisure rumpus time as you see fit? Why is that such a particularly strong and incessant urge for us to continue to discuss and ideate around? So we can first go into the economics here, because I think it's very easy to understand as economically unviable to have a population distribution which has the majority at say 45 years old and older, who only have functional years left of about 20 working years. And now the expectation is from an economist to just say, well, why don't you increase the years of active age that you're in the employed or in the workforce? So rather than retiring at 62 or 63, if we just increase the age to 70, then you obviously get 8 more years of non-support and also tax contributions, thinking that the ceteris paribus, the model holds true, that people will continue to pay taxes and won't be taking from the system. Obviously, bizarre that economists are so bad at this and understanding that life does not reflect that reality. And there's been some work in some countries around pension schemes, and that there's an idea that you can, say, promote your own pension or superannuation or retirement account. So you have your Roth IRA, for instance, in America, and if you self-fund it, then you can retire whenever you are sufficiently wealthy to do so, given your lifestyle. And there's also some age requirements around what tax benefits there are to waiting and whatnot. But in general, you can think of it a bit like as a self-supported pension scheme, because the government also knows that they're not going to be capable of sustaining this level of support and economic support in particular. And if you're wondering why it's such an egregious amount, why is it there's an abundance of claims, is because the way that society was structured, once you have universal voting privileges, suffrage for all, is that you incentivize those of the populace that will give you the most amount of votes to win favor, to win parliament majorities. And in the West, that was always seen as being the largest generations, and the largest generations that have continued to exist have also gotten older and older without necessarily changing their views on how things should benefit themselves. This applies most readily to boomers. I think they're not necessarily the unique case of selfishness, but they are a unique case of selfishness in the way that they operate and they behave is definitely something to behold in a way that's unforeseen. And in general, that's reflected in their policies, particularly around pensions, what they can expect from a healthcare system, what other benefits are conferred to them from being of a certain age or of a certain status or disposition or disability or whatever have you. Now, you'll start to notice that very many people become disabled as they get older for various reasons, but obviously the human body breaking down is one of the main ones there. So you compound a lot of these grievances and griefs to a degree and extent that you require more and more out of the system for the same amount of people, or at least a non-precipitous drop of people, particularly in, say, the 50s, 1950s, you would have had quite a lot of people die, men in particular, at 62, 63. So there wasn't as much of a carry through. And then women would still die, but maybe in the age range of 70 to 75. As this life expectancy increases, we have just more burden, and burdensome in particular around taking care of more disabled people, more people in need of healthcare for various reasons and ailments. And in general, older people just tend to use systems and services more, libraries, healthcare, as I said, any community facilities all get disproportionately utilized by old people because they have the free time, they're interested in those sort of things, and it fills their day up, basically. Now, that's the why, or the reasoning we can't pay for it is already unsustainable. You can see here in Greece, and this is just seen from 2017, percentage of relative GDP to benefits is already nearing 17.5% of your GDP. Which is an extraordinary amount of money to be spending on people who no longer contribute to society. I'm not such an economist that I feel as if we should weigh utilitarian-wise like Bentham or John Stuart Mill, everyone's life in a way that they contribute in that way. I think there should be some dignity to not working or not having retirement. And for various reasons, you can contribute to society without an economic number attached to you, my employment number, my employment wage. But an economy in our structure, the capitalistic, socialistic intercourse here, only works when it's structured in a certain way that benefits the prolongation of it, so it's sustainability. This doesn't work when you have very old people, very few young people, and the misbalance here of the amount of needed services and care and what's required from a pecuniary standpoint becomes too burdensome. It becomes such a strong pressure and that it drowns the rest of the population. And so we're punished. And you can see the retirement age in many countries is drifted slowly higher and higher because this is the reality. You cannot pay pensions to everyone who's 62 anymore. They would sink the entire GDP. This number would go from, say, 15% to 25 very quickly, because every year, obviously, a large percentage, say 1 or 2% of your population starts to age into these ranges, and not many of them die often enough to offset these new additions and the way that population curves work. Obviously, this is an inevitability. Now, the idea then that we have a crippled system, we've designed a system that's Ponzi schemed. It can be solved. I have suggested in other videos, particularly around the system of a tontine, that you pay into a certain raffle and the raffle disperses income at certain levels and you receive more income as more people who participate in the tontine die. It's a very easy system to see how it would work from a pension standpoint. People like gambling anyway, and you can obviously include them into schemes that have certain required pay-ins so that you would get more out if you paid more in at the start, presuming there was a certain risk, and you could probably get an actuary to tell you the likelihood of dying in the instances of people dying every year as part of certain tontines. So you could calculate a lot of these returns that way. And then you leave it upon themselves to decide how comfortable they want to be and how healthy they want to be and all these things, because obviously in the tontine, the longer you live, the more reward you do get out of those systems. And in the end, you could have all the money if you live to 120 or 50. So Brian Johnson's tontine is going to be one of the most competitive ones. And obviously you can bracket it into ages. This makes it particularly useful in dealing with a system like this. Now, the second part of this is that the reason we talk about, or our obsession with a monomania of retiring. Why do we all want to retire? Why is it such a centralized political discussion in every society across the West? Because there's this fascination with particularly the Anglo around retirement. It's to say, I value leisure, and the only reason I would ever work is to earn enough money to participate in my leisurely activities. This is a very core central element to the Anglo thought process. Spengler delves into this to a large degree around the design of society in Anglo societies around money and the idea that you would go out and earn your money so that you could retire like a gentleman to the countryside and use your wealth and do as you would want to do socially and all of these things, and that anything that you would give back would be done philanthropically. You would do it on your own volition, and that's how you would serve the community and things like that. That's a very Anglocentric mindset, but we've actually exported this as a consequence of the neoliberal democracy we've spread so fervently across the West. And when you partake in this system, it does still require the same mindset around earning money, because if you don't have that, where you still rely on a Prussian system, which is related to the government taking much more care of you, the state is actually seen as a reliable figure in your life rather than you can see it in America and in the UK, in the press, but in society and culture in particular, is that it feels as if the government sits on top of you. You don't tread on me, as the epigrammatic statement here around, I'm a libertarian, I don't want the government oppressing me in that way. It feels as if it's suffocating me with your governmental tendrils, you're the nanny state, go away. This is not the mentality in large swathes of Europe, where the state is seen actually as a reliable bureaucratic function that is hopefully there for your best interests, or at least wider society's best interests. It's not here to cripple you, it's here to help you if you've been crippled. So the switch becomes very evident when you see how that these countries operate. They like to give, and you can see in particular in how lauded Sweden and Norway are in their programs, social programs, obviously very generous in their schemes. Because this is the natural tendency for these people, is to say we have a government which represents the people in that way, and we want them to be at least receiving the generous benefits that we're able to procure and proffer to them. Now, once again, this breaks down because you've embraced what is an Anglocentric worldview. You've gone into this idea that we can have a liberal democracy where we focus on light intervention capitalism. But the subsequent response to that is, okay, well then tax rates need to be effective and high enough to maybe offset what we value more than, say, America values. Now, America has a hard time understanding the free market inclusion into healthcare, and that leaves them with a massive burden in terms of state spend and federal spending on healthcare. And they have their own problems with that, and they will, as they also have an aging population, have to address those issues around what do you do with aged care and pensions in particular. Do you start to stop paying pensions and put people into mass university dorm style housing where you can actually address their basic needs and then just say, look, you're going to get a really small amount of pocket money, half of what your uncle or your father or your mother would have gotten, and that's just the way that you have to suck it up. Otherwise you would have had to rely on your own Roth or your own pension superannuation. But I think this doesn't address the underlying issue. And as I said before, it is a little bit generational. So you can see here that boomers have been taking everyone else to the cleaners, not having to start saving until they were 36, huge rise in property prices. Everything about their life is structured in a way that they benefit from every generation before them in unsurpassable and unforeseen ways, and then handed almost nothing down in that fashion. So because you start to hoard things that come to you quite easily, and there's an instinct around greed that humans all have, we're voracious in that way, then our avarice has the cost that if you feel as if these aren't common goods, they're actually my singular possessions, they're my private property, so like housing and territory, like land, for instance, then that becomes an issue more broadly because you have a hoarding effect where the more I can buy, the more less you get. Housing and land in particular is a finite resource. This doesn't apply to other things like iPhones and cars. But when people think about having a family and starting a family, they obviously want a house and having land and things like this. So you can see the flow-on effect. And in generational combat, you can understand why there's a bit of chagrin or at least enmity from the millennials and the Gen Zs that will go upwards and that'll hit the boomers as they pass on. So we'll see how that dynamic plays out, but it's not going to be very pretty. But then it goes into as I said before, the core premise here. Why is it that everyone has this understanding that retirement is good? Why do we obsess with this idea? Because if you think back to what would have been the early 20th century, and Max Weber came with a treatise on this, where he called it the Protestant work ethic. So say, we work as Protestants, and this is particularly the West, because the Occident is almost synonymous with what was historically Protestant, and then before that Catholic, and before that Germanic pagan. This identity is carried through, and the structures change, but morphologically we've stayed the same. Anyhow, the mindset here has not been changed, is that we work purposefully for each other in ways that allows for the flourishment of society. We all get something out of us working each individually, but also collectively. So we have a goal, we have a collective idea of ourselves, and our understanding is that society is structured around that way, including immigrants. That obviously very much impacts how this social contract is agreed upon. But then there's also other things around what size of society does that structure naturally just break down. How do you go from having a culture of 50,000 people to 50 million, 100 million, and then still expect there to be an upholding of this generational contract where you're passing down the expectation of certain things being true. And this, for instance, was the case that most people didn't live past 65. It hasn't been the case for very many years, maybe the last 200, where someone in their dotage or a septuagenarian or someone was more rare than common. Whereas now, if I walk down the street, I'll see many, many, many people over the age of 70, and even a few in their 90s. It's not as rare, and it doesn't become a marvel, and they're not these holders of tribal wisdom either that they previously and historically would have been. So you would go see the tribal elder, or you would see the seer or the sage, and ask them for advice and connect with them that way. But because there's 50 million oldies, I mean, who cares? And they haven't necessarily lived lives where they're able to bequeath to you anything important on their deathbeds. So at the same time, it's also a breakdown of what we want out of life and who we want to contribute what in what ways. That goes into the more, I want to call it metaphysical realm of this, which is to say, why would you want to retire? What exactly are you going to do with your life? Now, I pulled a graph here demonstrating my point in a very quantitative way. This is the daily living of a retired person. They spend 4.5 hours watching TV a day, relaxing and leisure 6 hours, sleeping for 9 hours, eating and drinking for an hour and a bit, reading for a bit, socializing for a bit, grooming for a bit. I mean, these are all very basic living tasks that don't excite me, and I'd be very shocked if I tried to explain to someone who was 30 that these are things that you will be looking forward to doing, because they're just quotidian things. They're just more of things I already can do. I can sit and watch TV for 2 hours instead of 4.5. Is that a marked difference? Is that such an astronomical increase in my perceived happiness of the way I spend my hours? Of course not. It's just more slop being filtered into this mind of mine, and it's not enhancing my life in any way. It's not addressing the reason I'm here, my destiny at all. Relaxing and leisure is a total mental breakdown. For me, leisure is a reflection of resting when you've exerted yourself. So if you've done something strenuous, then leisure is the natural byproduct of your body going into a stasis, into a recovery mode, or a rehabilitation. That makes sense. And I definitely value leisure to a high degree, but I think the Bertrand Russell tier, life and happiness, are correlated quite strongly with doing nothing, because I'm a bit of a dunderhead, meandering through my own life with no purpose. I think that's just the association here is very much of an NPC, a normie life, where there's nothing worth living and nothing worth writing about. I may as well just exist for 20 years after I've stopped working and then pass away with no one to remember me. It just doesn't hit for me, you know, and I just don't quite comprehend why people obsess about it. Why are you so intent on not working? It's probably because your job sucks, but that's somewhat of a personal reflection, or there's an assignation here around what you chose to do. You have become who you allowed yourself to become. You don't choose a job or a role if you don't feel as if it's rewarding you in some way. You're a praxeological being. Why would you choose this job and do this thing? Well, it's because this is what you get out of it. And it makes sense, but then you go, okay, so how have I not pre-planned for this to be the case, that I wanted to feel as if I was contributing to myself, to society, to my legacy, to my saga in the way that is holistic. It's planned for my entire life. I have something to do. I'm not just going to sit and watch TV 4.5 hours and sleep for 9. This is a mindless way to spend. You may as well be an automaton, just shut down, turn off and go away. Like, this really isn't something I think anyone should aspire to reach as a point. Now, I can understand exhaustion. I'm a young-ish man, and I probably have energy levels that are much higher, and testosterone probably plays a lot of role in how much drive and will there are to do certain things. But historically, you can see many, many, many men and women who never age out of being purposeful. 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. From women, that can mean anything from being a caretaker, like a grandmother or great-grandmother, in very important ways, like inclusive and actually contributing value to the family life, but also to other ways around how they interact with their communities, and it can be something as simple as like crocheting blankets and making all these nice things, and you've had biddies for across the ages contribute in very meaningful ways on this. Even goes into religion, for instance, volunteering. But so the idea here that you have to age out of being purposeful or useful, I think, is a bit of a misnomer, or it's a miscalculation on what it means to be alive. Why would you be here doing all these things for all these years just to stop? Are you going to go on a holiday for 2 years? What do you want to see? Already trodden environments? Oh wow, you're going to go sit on a beach in Spain or Hawaii? I mean, really? What's the point? Like, what are you getting out of that? Oh, it's relaxing. Okay, well, why be alive? I mean, what is it that's living about this? You're just passive. You're receptive to everything. It's an awful way to feel as if you're contributing, and I think it loses its sense even with money. Is that, like, we have this perception of someone who's lazy in a tribe for a reason, is you're a layabout, and this Diogenes figure is not seen as a good thing. It's not a blessing. It's not someone where I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a misanthrope for those reasons, but you have to understand that the idea that we're collectively here for each other is socialistic. It's very much this knightly pedigree around, you have to help me because I'm helping you. And once you become lame, then I can feel as if that there's less burden on you to do things. I have the expectation lowered, and there's some other things about being, as I say, in your dotage, that I don't necessarily attribute. You not should be there with a spear defending the castle, but there are still functions and tasks where I feel as if you'll get something out of that too, to help and to be involved. Just sitting there watching the day go by, go to sleep and then come back and watch the day go by, is not living at all. It's just this passive, as I said before, automaton where there's a function and you do it and you go back and you rest and there's nothing else to it. And we have this instinctual, I think, disgust around the lack of contribution with potential and around talent. So if you have potential, you have talent for things, not using them feels as if it's just a massive waste. Just a waste personally, but also more collectively. And that can go into being old. Like, there are many old men and women who are craftsmen and who are skilled, highly skilled at things like, and it could be, as I said before, as simple as something like playing the piano, making music for people. Like, these are things that you can pursue even in your old age and are still value adding. So retiring seems a bit of a miscalculation on how your life can go, because everything can be economized to some degree, and it's just a matter of structuring society in a way that transforms the idea of retirement into doing nothing into, say, a social sponsored role or a vocation, or there's some level of professionalism to what you want to do, and it doesn't have to be taxing, it doesn't have to be hard back-breaking labor, but there can still be roles generated and say volunteered positions which aren't volunteered. We pay for them to do things that maybe people were incentivized previously to do without being paid, or there's some way to earn your bread, but not in I would say a soulless, awful economic way, but much more in a psychologically well-being way. How do we make these people feel as if they're still contributing? So I think that's the crux of it for me, is to say, don't think of retirement as this goal, as this object. All it is the way that you put a racehorse out to pasture. This is not a blessing for the racehorse. The racehorse is going from the exciting life, doing all the things that it's built to do, to sitting and eating grass, waiting to get when it's got a lame leg. This is definitely not something to be aspiring to. And it's also not something we can economically pay for anyway going forward. So those are two, I think, moral or intellectual dilemmas. The intellectual dilemma you'll have to start to ponder yourself is like, what is it that I want out of a career? Because I'm now staring in the face of probably having to work forever. And if I wanted to retire and be useless, then I have to at least plan for that economically.